Prospector News is media for educational purposes only and should not be construed as advice. We are not a certified financial analyst, licensed broker, or fund dealer, exempt market dealer, or hold a license to provide financial advice. We provide no legal opinion regarding accounting, tax, or law issues. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice or the solicitation to buy or sell stocks or commodities. All opinions expressed are those of the participants and should not be relied upon when making investment decisions. Those decisions should be made with the advice of a personal financial advisor. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please hit the like and share buttons and be sure to hit subscribe. This is Michael Fox, and this is the Prospector News Podcast. And joining me today is longtime contributor and publisher of the National Investor, Chris Temple. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Mike. How are you?
I am doing very well. Summer's over, Labor Day's past us, and it's time to get an eye on the world and the markets again. Now, everyone seems to have been very distracted over the summer with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and inflation and Biden's, plans for the Anti-Inflation Act and that. But I think we've been ignoring a bigger elephant in the room, and that's really huge in China.
Well, we have, and it's something that I've been talking about, certainly among others, for quite a while. Just this morning, for instance, and I sent a copy of this to you, one of the writers for the Financial Times, Megan Green, she authored a piece. The title is "Ignoring China's Disastrous 3Ds Could Be a Global Risk." And those 3Ds are debt, drought, and disease, not necessarily all in that order. China is an enigma to a lot of people. Institutionally, they run their country a lot differently than we do in the West. There's some good aspects about that. There's some bad aspects about that. I've pointed out many times before that, and because this has happened previous to this, that, you think that, boy, there's no way China can continue to keep all these balls in the air. But then the People's Bank of China gets an edict from the Chinese Communist Party and says, you're going to do this. And they say, yes, we will. And they extend and pretend and push things farther along, because unlike with the European Central Bank or the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada, those are not, those are autonomous organizations, at least to a fair extent. The People's Bank of China, however, is an appendage of the central government. So one of the reasons they've been able to play this extend and pretend for a long time is because there's never any question that the job one is to keep everything afloat. And that's even getting difficult now. Don't forget, folks, that there is no major economic bloc on this planet. And China, of course, now is second to the U.S. as far as the size of its economy. Nobody has got the debt to GDP ratio that China does. And I'm talking about public and private debt when you total it up. Not even Japan, let alone Europe, let alone the U.S. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to manage that debt. So China and, news out of China, you've always got to take with, not just a grain, but maybe a pound of salt. We don't know how bad these rolling pandemic lockdowns really are over there. But we do know a few things. We know that while the rest of the world is either tightening monetary policy or starting to, China, since basically this time last year almost, has been going in the opposite direction. They've been trying to keep the managed default, or marketized default, as they call it, of Evergrande from turning into a complete debacle. Now numerous other real estate firms are biting the dust. You've got all kinds of stress in the banking system over there. You've got people that are protesting in the streets because they can't get all their money out of banks. You've got people that invested in real estate that all of a sudden are being told that they're not going to get their money back. So it's a messy situation. And, policy is murky where the U.S. and China and their relationship is concerned. So this is for many years, Mike, been an accident waiting to happen in the world. And it may be a lot closer to happening now. There's some serious questions as to whether China is headed for a really epic implosion of their whole financial structure, let alone their society.
Yeah, it's one of those strange things. I've often wondered aloud with these so-called lockdowns due to the Wuhan virus or COVID, however you wish to look at it. Part of me says they've really doubled down on their zero tolerance policies, but the other part of me looks and goes, there seems to be some brewing civil unrest happening in China. And is the government taking the COVID crisis in their country and the lockdowns and using that to keep people from gathering in the streets?
I suspect that could be part of it. I suspect that, look, anytime any country that has a totalitarian bent is worried that it's going to lose its grip on things, you've got to have one or more crises, or you need to have one or more external bogeymen. On that latter, this is one of the reasons why you have to wonder either the idiocy or the nefariousness behind Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker in the U.S. Congress, and a number of other federal and state elected officials and others who have had you've had this conveyor belt between the U.S. and Taiwan. Why? You just had the government approve another big whack of military spending to send more arms to Taiwan. Why? Isn't one proxy war, in this case with Russia at a time, enough? We got to have a second one. So the pot is being
the government
stirred.
didn't get that memo about fighting wars on two fronts.
They must not have. So, and it's not just China, it's the U.S., it's Europe to some extent, although they're a somewhat passive bystander getting dragged along into this whole murky mess. You've got Russia, and everybody, blames everybody but themselves for intrigue and for lying and for having ulterior motives and the rest of this stuff. But the fact is that, and we get back to the example of the moment with China, the whole world is choking on not just unpayable debt, but now debt that is becoming unserviceable. You can't do anything about it without a willingness to completely upend and change the monetary systems themselves to ones that will benefit people. That sure as hell isn't going to happen. And so the only thing you got left, and you can go back to ancient Rome and numerous examples in between, you've got to have a crisis. If you don't have one, you manufacture one, and you blame everybody but yourself for it. So I'm concerned about what's going on in China now and what further may come out of China. I'm concerned that policymakers in my country have given China even more reasons to crack down and more cover, frankly, when it comes, or if it comes, to a bigger bust of their economy. I don't know how many folks in our audience read the Epoch Times, either online or their hard copy newspaper, but in the online version, I authored a 4-part story earlier in this year asking the rhetorical question, but with a lot of history and examples behind it. Could China today go the way that Japan did 30 some odd years ago? Japan, if you go back to the 80s, was the financial hegemon all of a sudden in the world, choking on foreign exchange surpluses, buying everything that wasn't nailed down. And you had people in the U.S. from from Warren Buffett even and on down, saying, why are we letting this country buy America with our own money? Well, what happened in the end? You had a major economic bubble and market bubbles in Japan, real estate, stocks and stuff like that. They burst. Japan had to pull their horns in, and that was the end of them. And I'm not the only one who looks at China today and says that we could be seeing a repeat of the same kind of pattern. But this will be far messier than what happened to Japan if it happens to China, because unlike Japan, where the implications were, number one, just solely economic and maybe markets are concerned, and number two, relate fairly well just to them, and they've been able to manage this somewhat. China's a different kettle of fish. You've got a country that's a far larger economy. They have territorial ambitions. They have geopolitical ambitions to regain their empire of old. And there will be blowback. There will be reactions on the part of China if they can't keep control of things that we can only speculate nervously about.
Yeah. And, that's just the geopolitics of it. My concern is that this is happening within the Chinese real estate market. And the Chinese real estate market has become rather global. Chinese nationals own a good chunk of my former city, Vancouver, a lot of San Francisco, a lot of Los Angeles, a lot of downtown Manhattan. And those financial fingers are spreading out all over the world, including in Australia and other markets. And I got to wonder that if there's an economic collapse in China, given the nature of its government, are they going to try and refinance their banks by calling back all that international real estate? And is that going to have a spillover effect here in North America?
Well, Mike, let me give you a corollary example that was also in the news just today. Equinor, which is a big energy firm from Europe, warned that because of the huge spike in energy costs over there, and a lot of investors, counterparties, energy market players, and so forth being caught with hedges in a bad place, you could be facing as much as $1.5 trillion coming up of margin calls. So the financialization of energy could cause everything to implode with cascading effect if this gets out of hand. Now, some countries are already saying they're going to backstop the financial institutions. They're going to try and cap. The new UK Prime Minister is talking about capping residential electric rates and all the rest of this stuff. But I mean, that puts a Band-Aid at best over a gaping wound. It's not going to fix things. Likewise, China, the whole world has invested in China in one way or another. There's been investment banking relationships that help to build this skyscraper of cards, which is the Chinese real estate market and sector. And yeah, you've got to wonder at what point, everybody's starting to take haircuts in the recent past and so forth. So far, it's still holding together. But the old saying is that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And if you get to the place where you've got somebody who goes belly up and takes a lot of people with them, then you could see the financial dominoes falling. And this is a lesson that it sounds strange to talk about right now with all of the talk in recent months of 40-year high inflation and so forth. But don't ever forget, folks, that when you have this kind of inflation, which first and foremost boosted all of these asset prices to unrealistic levels, and finally has dragged everyday producer and consumer prices with it. Don't forget that within that, you have the threat of deflation. We have had for some years now this boom and bust environment where asset prices inflate. They get too far out of hand, something breaks, and it all tumbles back down, and then the central banks have to do it all over again. And people seem to have forgotten, with all the talk of inflation, and rising costs, that the threat of a deflation, which we certainly deserve after the binge of the last couple of years with monetary policy, those risks have not gone away. If anything, they're worse. And now they're being laid bare by what the rise in real estate prices, the unreasonable levels, and now it's no longer sustainable in China. The rise in energy prices to where now you're seeing, not just in Europe, but even in the US now. I haven't heard any examples in Canada, but there's been a couple of aluminum plants, for example, in the US that have announced shutdowns, at least temporarily, because of utility costs. So you could quickly have this cause a massive reversal of the financial inflation, asset price inflation that we've had. Of course, if that happened, the central banks would respond to it again like they have before. But don't forget that those risks have never gone away. And now you're seeing, again, with China and their economy teetering, to the point where China's got an ease policy while everybody else is trying to tighten it to rein inflation in. China's got the opposite problems. And, people, and I just had a conversation with a copper company that I really, really liked this morning. And I'm probably at some point going to add them as a recommendation. But, we were talking openly, more me than them, of, what happens if China implodes and copper's $2 again before it's $5 down the road. So these risks are real. And last but not least, Mike, not to ramble too long, but even China's economy that was built on outsourcing by US and other companies to come there and build these things, they're leaving now. There's another story just in recent days about companies like Apple that they're getting tired of the lockdowns, they're tired of the uncertainty. There's a little bit of pressure on them now because of China's human rights violations, which everybody was turning a blind eye to. But now you've got economic and financial reasons to pay attention to those things. So some of these countries that originally, years back, got rid of American or German workers or whatever the case may be and went to China, now they're getting rid of Chinese workers and leaving China, and they're going to Vietnam, Malaysia, and whatnot. So at a time when China's stressed and having trouble keeping all of these balls in the air with its debt mess, now their economy is starting to get hollowed out even more. So it's not going to be pretty, I fear.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that. The article you alluded to earlier, they said that in China, home prices have been dropping for the last 11 months. And excluding Evergrande, there was another 30 real estate companies that had defaulted on their international debt. So this knock-on effect has already started. And if people can't afford a roof over their head and food over their table, that generally breeds social unrest. And, I have to wonder with the convention of the party that's coming up here in the fall, I'm starting to wonder if Xi's plan to be president for life is in jeopardy.
I've read conflicting things about that. Frankly, I think that he's going to maintain power. I haven't read anything compelling enough with what I see that suggests that someone's going to oust him, because anybody else that had a mind to do that is going to inherit the same mess. It's better to ride with him because Xi has made very plain that he's already looking at ways to cut that umbilical cord, or at least somewhat, with the West, generally with the US specifically, bring back Maoism to the country, where they punish the wealthy and the reckless that he says got them into this mess. That's the sales pitch. They outdid the Fed where fractional reserve banking is concerned. They allowed people who had the right connections to outdo the worst of anything you've heard about the 1% in the US getting filthy rich, helping to build this skyscraper of cards. So now it's convenient to make them out to be the bogeymen, and they're going to go back to the prosperity for all kind of, mantra of Chairman Mao. So I don't think they're going to go back on that because, again, they're going to continue selling the idea that, you know, it's all for one and one for all, and whatever problems China has are because they made a mistake and were too much like the West, or because the West is trying to squeeze them. You know, everybody will be the bad guy but them. Whether they pull it off or not remains to be seen, because, again, as we alluded to earlier, you've had protests in the country at various times over the banking situation and the average yokel not being able to get all their money out of the banks. China, of course, historically has for eons had the chronic problem of, unlike Japan, when that nation, you know, started to implode financially and had to pull their horns in, there wasn't any kind of major social stress or whatnot, because you have a very homogenous country there. China, with all the different hinterlands and different ethnic groups and stuff, it's always been like herding cats. So, you know that behind the scenes, they're very concerned about keeping control of the situation. Whether they succeed or not, we'll find out.
Well, and then there's the demographic problem. China's got a rapidly aging population, like most of the West has as well.
Well, like most of the West, and that was Japan's problem as well. And, China's issue is they might be able to slide by if they were able to compel a significant part of the world to help paper over their problems. But unlike the US, which has been able to get away with that, having the world's reserve currency, and we can compel a good part of the world to do that, at least up to this point, China does not have that situation yet. Now, that said, an interesting development, again, just in the very recent past, since you and I spoke, is that you're seeing Russia and China and India get back together and form their own bloc. They're going to expand the whole BRICS notion that started with them a while back. And, China may get some help from, well, chiefly Russia, but they may get some help in all of this. And again, one of the other dynamics playing into this that is another wild card that may have implications beyond just the mathematics of the whole situation is that, thanks to the actions of this country in starting this proxy war with Russia several years ago, and when Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland and the rest of that crew went over there and overthrew Ukraine's pro-Russian government and put the stooge Zelensky in there for exactly the purpose that he's fulfilled, that we see in the newspapers today. You know, Biden and this whole crew, wittingly or not, have dramatically accelerated the move away from dollarization, from the dollar and the U.S. generally, maintaining the kind of hegemony over the world by and large that we've had since the end of World War II. So whether China is bailed out of its mess by these new alliances and they're able to limp along, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, but something's going to give someplace. I just wish I could find Doc Brown and borrow his damn car and go into the future and find out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It'd be a good idea if we knew what was going to happen. But as the Chinese curse says, may we live in interesting times. If people want to get a hold of you, Chris, and hear more of your thoughts, how would they do it?
Simply visit me at nationalinvestor.com or drop me a line to chris@nationalinvestor.com. A lot of stuff coming out. I'm finishing up a special issue on the precious metals markets. That's going to be quickly followed by one on story stocks of a general nature, and then one specifically on uranium. Also doing a bunch of webinars and stuff coming up this fall. One is going to be on a lot of these geopolitical changes that are taking place. But if you're on my mailing list, you'll be hearing about all of them.
Perfect. And as I always say, Chris, you and I never need reasons to talk, but it's good to have lots of them.
I suppose so. Otherwise, we'd all be sitting around twiddling our thumbs. But yeah, that Chinese proverb, it's an understatement to say we're in interesting times. We're dealing with things. And look, you know this as well. Investors are dealing with things, and this is just one of them, talking about China fairly specifically today. We're dealing with things that none of us have ever lived through. You know, none of us have known a world where the US dollar was not king of the hill. That is going to change. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be because Joe Biden comes and takes away our currency and our bank accounts and gives us Biden bucks like some shyster is talking about these days. But it's going to evolve. We're going to see a situation where the global order is going to change. So we've never known a world like this, and it's going to have, I can tell you, I hate to say it from the standpoint of an American citizen, but with what I see coming, even though the US will still have a lot of power, more in our hemisphere as things evolve, US citizens are not going to be winners out of this. I'm sorry to say, under the current trajectory of things.
No, it'll be interesting to see what transpires. I would kind of cautiously agree with you, except historically, when faced with a crisis, America has always seemed to come together. So I'm not quite prepared to to bet against them, but I know where you're coming from. So
until next time. And I wouldn't bet against us either. And look, another thing that I had a conversation with this morning with the same copper company executive is that if we had the right policymakers who understood economics and engineering and supply chain, things like that, then together with Canada, I mean, we could have a few decades ahead of us rebuilding and building infrastructure with the energy transition and so forth. We could have an era of prosperity rivaling the original industrial revolution, but that's being mishandled. And so that for us in this part of the world, and for the US especially, makes this an especially risky time, because if China does collapse or China does get pushed over the edge by US foreign policy, it's one thing for Europe to be without the energy that it needs. That's bad enough. We're relatively insulated from that in this part of the world, except for what people's heating bills are going to be, because we got to give away our cheap natural gas, make it more expensive to bail them out. But if China goes the same way, or if we back China into a corner and they respond as Russia has done, and all of a sudden we don't have refined battery metals, we don't have refined rare earth metals, we don't have helium, we don't have uranium, we don't have a lot of things, and this happens before we're ready for this, then we're going to be hurting just as bad as Europe. So very, very tenuous time right now.
Yeah, agreed. No, I don't get the sense that even our government's particularly prepared for the crisis that may be coming.
Well, probably not. I mean, as much as Justin Trudeau would prepare as whoever seems like they're going to be the up-and-comer. He'll dress up as a Russian Cossack or a Chinese fortune teller, one or the other.
So we'll pick this conversation up. The way the world's been moving, we're still going to have lots to talk about in a couple of weeks. So
for sure.
Take care.
You too, Mike.